In this video, we're going to go ahead and create our chat component. So our chat component is actually going to be very, very straightforward, but it's also going to allow us an opportunity to create our text input component, which is, I'm going to show you guys how we can kind of abstract away the basic inputs that you might use or buttons that you might use or whatever into very reusable components, which you would do for more things than just input classes in React, or you might import a library that does that for you. But we're going to do that just for our text inputs in this course, so I can show you guys just how to do it, but not waste a bunch of time with even more styling. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to stub everything out first so that I can include it in the lobby. And then we will go down, we'll go starting from the text input, implement that, then implement the chat, and then integrate it with the lobby itself. So let's start off with creating our text input. I'm going to create a new file called controls.js, and then another new file called controls.scss. So again, there are plenty of text input controls that you can go and grab from NPM, but it's important to understand how they're implemented, how you can write your own, and so on. So I'm going to, in controls.js, I'm going to import our controls.scss. Then I'm going to import React and component. This will be a stateful component from React. And then I'm going to say export class text input extends component. And then I'm going to render, and I'm just going to return a p tag text input, whatever. Now let's go ahead and do stub out our chat as well. So in components, I'm going to right click, create a new component called chat.js, a new file called chat.scss. And then in chat.js, it's going to be very similar to what we did with text input. We are going to import our chat.scss module. We are then going to import our React as well as component from React. Then we're going to export class chat. Actually, you know what? I'm going to export default class chat, and then I'm going to extend that from component. Now, I'm also going to import our text input. So I'm going to import text input from controls. And inside of this, I'm going to put in just a simple render, and the render is simply going to return, it's just going to return our text input. We're not going to do anything super fancy just yet. Again, I just need to construct the hierarchy so that we can see this text input appearing on our screen and work with it, so that we can do the text input first, then the chat component. And then the final thing I got to do in that regard is load in our chat component from our lobby. So come into the lobby, come up here. I'm going to do this underneath our import of React. I'm going to import chat from /chat. And then I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to simply write it out. Now, of course, we will be passing props into the chat component here later, but for now, we're just worried about our text input class. And this should be enough. If I come here and refresh, this should be enough to have a text box right here. Well, just our p tag text input. And you'll notice that with our text input, because it's not a top-level component, because we have our top-level component, our lobby container, we're including chat, rendering that out, and then chat is simply including text input and rendering that out. Because it's not a top-level component, our hot reloading will work. So you see I can change this, hit Control-S, and I don't have to refresh. Now let's go ahead and write the JSX for the chat input. Writing a control like this is very, very straightforward. There's not a lot of code to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a few properties. I'm going to say get value return this.input.value. What is this.input? Well, this.input does not exist yet, but it will when we get down to the render method. Then I'm going to say set value this input value equals value. So you can kind of think of this as sort of abstracting over a text box. For our markup, however, we will be doing something interesting. I'll start off with the div with the class name. And for this, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do div class name. Let's go ahead and close that off so I stop getting Visual Studio Code yelling at me. I'm going to open up a template string inside of curly's, and I'm going to start off with m-textbox, followed by a template string of props.classname or empty string. So I'm going to allow, whoops, I meant to say, actually what I want to do is I want to say const props equals this.props. I always get used to doing that at the top, so I forget the this dot. But anyway, what this will do is this will create a div with the class of mTextBox followed by potentially whatever class name was passed in from the beginning. Then what I'm going to do is down here, I'm going to open up an input. But I'm going to do something interesting with this. I'm going to open up a curly, so I'm going to do ... props. This means that any props that are passed in to our text input will be applied to this input box inside of it. So things like the placeholder, for example, or changing the type to password or something like that. I actually want to go ahead and put type equals text before that. Then our props. Then I want to put a ref equals, and then a lambda of this input equals C. So this function right here, our ref, is how we get the this.input value. And I'm not underscoring this, meaning that if people do want to reach into the underlying input, they are allowed to do so. And then the final thing I want to do is say div class name equals border. And if I close this out, we'll notice that our text box does indeed appear to be working. The only thing we have left to do is to style it. I know, everyone's favorite thing, but I really wanted to show this cool little technique for styling things that are in a similar way to how material design thingies style your text boxes, how you might see something in like a Google product or someone emulating that design. And I wanted to show you guys that cool little trick, as well as incorporating it into the overarching, this is how we would take the concept of a text box and turn it into our own little component. And we can make it even more interesting. We could add a label and all that fun stuff, and then we could reuse it throughout our application. So bear with me, we have a little bit of CSS to write, but it's not that bad. Let's hop into our controls.scss. And I'm going to say I'm going to import our variables first, of course. Import variables. Then I'm going to say .mTextBox. Position relative, that's going to be important for our border. Then I'm going to say input. We're going to give a background of transparent, and that should immediately make that disappear, and it does. We're going to give it a border of none, so now it's really not visible. A border radius of 3 pixels. A padding of 5 pixels 0. That's not how you spell padding. A display of block, and an outline of none, and a width of 100%. So now it's completely invisible, which doesn't really help us out a lot. So let's go ahead and add a border underneath it. I'm going to exit out of the input rule, and I'm going to say and : after, give it a content of just an empty space so that it renders this pseudo element. I'm going to give it a height of 2 pixels, a width of 100 pixels, a position of absolute, a bottom of 0, a left of 0, and a background of color section border. So now it should be clear why I have the position relative on this mText box, so that my after pseudo element gets added down there at the bottom relative. Its absolute positioning is relative to its parent. Then let's style the border. Now this border is only going to be active when we select the text box, and it's going to be animated in a really cool way. So we're first of all going to give it a content. We're actually going to do things very similar to our after. In fact, I could have put this into a mix-in if I wanted to. Some of these rules anyway. The content of empty string, or not empty string, but a space so that it renders. A position of absolute, a bottom of 0. The width I'm going to give 0. And the background of color primary, my favorite blue color. And then a transition of width 200 milliseconds ease. And a z-index of 1. Actually, I completely messed this up. And the reason is we actually want 2 borders. One is going to be using the pseudo element before, and one is going to be using the pseudo element after. But we can fix this very easily. By inside of the border rule, we can say and before and after, so that we're now selecting those pseudo elements. And now we're styling both the pseudo elements, but they're not visible, obviously, because the width is 0. But if I open it up in the inspector, you'll see that the border does indeed have both a, oh, come on. The border does indeed have a before and after, both with the width of 0. Now I want to go ahead and center them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say and before left 50%, and after right of 50%. Now, they both do the same thing right now, but you'll see in a second why that matters. So now if I come in here and look at my pseudo elements, you'll see they are indeed located in the middle of that. The final thing we have to do is we have to say, if this element is focused, then change the width of these two pseudo elements. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I have to do is some CSS trickery. It's really cool. So what I need to do is, if the input is focused, I want to select a sibling element with the class of border. Then I want to select his corresponding pseudo elements. So what I'm going to do is, inside of input, I'm going to say and focus. So only if it's focused. Then I'm going to say plus dot border colon before, comma, and focus plus dot border colon after width equals 50%. So what this is doing is this is selecting the before pseudo element of the border only if the input is selected on a sibling element of the input element. So now if I click on this, you see that it does indeed expand like that. So it's a cool little trick. I just wanted to show it to you guys and kind of drive home the point that we can create these complex wrappers over existing traditional HTML elements to provide us with more functionality, more animations, or what have you. The last thing I want to do in this video is I want to be able to have the optionally have that border appear on the top instead of the bottom. So what I'm going to do is come in here to our chat, and on the text input, I'm going to say class name equals top dash border. Now that's not going to change anything just yet because we haven't done anything that hooks into top border. But if I jump back into our controls.scss, and on the m text box, I'm going to do this after the border element. I'm going to say and dot top border. So if this is styled with the top border, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to style the border, and I'm going to say after and before top is 0. And then on the border itself, I'm going to say after and after top 0. So now you'll notice that we almost got it right, or I almost got it right. Oh, right, that's not on the border. That's why I always like doing the afters before or after, it depends. So now the if the input has a top border, it will indeed show up at the top instead of the bottom. So that gives us a little bit more control. But anyway, again, the purpose of this video wasn't really to talk about CSS, but CSS can be fun sometimes. The purpose was we can see how we can wrap our components, like I said before, and you're not limited to just providing these methods on this component. We could add additional methods if you wanted to add other sorts of things. You could add labels, you could add validation even to this component, and then reuse it throughout your application. Just make sure it's fairly generic. And with that, we'll end this video. In the next video, we will work on our chat box, and we'll see you guys then.